So this is being recorded, but it's also being live captioned as well for people who require the captioning. That's what's going on in the top here. All right. Hi, everybody. We're gonna give a few minutes for everyone to arrive and get settled. And we will be starting shortly. So come on in. If you feel comfortable, please turn your camera on. We'd love to be able to see your face. If you are not able to, that's obviously fine. But we'd love to be able to see the faces of Davenport as we go into this debate today. It'll make it feel a little bit more like an in-person debate, except, the ability to wear sweatpants, although maybe you'd wear that to the debate anyways. I don't know. But as you come in, if you want to turn your camera on, great. If you don't, that's fine. You will be automatically muted unless you are one of our speakers tonight, one of our candidates. And we ask that you stay on mute for the entire time. And we will get started in approximately 2 minutes. All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the Davenport 100 Debates for the Environment online 2021 edition. We're so pleased to have 3 of our excellent candidates in Davenport riding with us tonight to talk about the environment and share with you in this very quick and very exciting election where they stand. Just to note that in the top left corner of your screen, I don't know if I'm pointing at it, but there is something that you can click on if you want closed captioning. It's called Otter AI. It's a red live button. If you click on the button, it's going to take you to another web page where you'll be able to read what's being said in the session as it's being transcribed live. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the land that we are on. Toronto is the dish with one spoon territory. It's the treaty that was a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Of course, this is also the home to the Huron-Wendat and other subsequent Indigenous nations, and of course, all of us as treaty people and settlers on this land. I want to encourage everybody to have a look at a website called native-land.ca, which has just been put in the chat. Thank you, Julie. This is a place where you can actually look up what territory you're on anywhere in Canada, I believe actually all over North America. And you can also read about the treaties that govern that land. It's a really excellent resource for us to familiarize ourselves with the story of the people on this land before us. And I would just say to encourage us all to take action in some form, reading the Truth and Reconciliation Committee recommendations, on the 30th of September, taking time to remember and honor the children who were lost in the residential schools, and learn about our shared history. So my name is Sabrina Bowman. I'm the moderator tonight. I come from this land, Toronto, Ontario. I grew up here, and I have been a very long time interested in the environment from a very young age. I was also the former executive director of GreenPAC. So the last time we did these debates, I was in that position. I've been very honored and fortunate to work on environmental issues for most of my life. And I'm an excited and passionate Davenporter, really excited to see, what's going to come of this debate and the conversation around the environment. It's a little bit about my background, and we have a really amazing team as well who are listed here, some of them as co-hosts for this event, who brought this together. So what's happening tonight? Across the country, there are going to be debates on the environment. This initiative first started in 2019, and we had 104 federal debates before the 2019 election on the environment across the country. It was one of the biggest efforts of this type ever to happen in Canada. Certainly, I think on the same night, probably the biggest on the same night to have a themed debate that isn't the National Leaders Debate. And you know what? It really showed us at that time, and I think it shows us now, that environment was and continues to be a #1 priority for Canadians. In fact, the polls show that environment and climate change are a #1 priority for Canadians. The conversation is not going away. In fact, it's only growing, and it's growing in all parties. And I think that's really exciting. So I encourage you to check out greenpac.ca if you don't know about GreenPAC, to learn a little more about them, and 100debates.ca to learn a little more about the initiative and what's been going on. All right, so I just wanted to formally introduce our 3 candidates that are here today: Adrian Curry from the Green Party, Julie Zarowitz from the Liberal Party of Canada, and Alejandro Bravo from the NDP. I do want to note that we also did invite candidates from the People's Party of Canada as well as the Conservative candidates. So I just want to let everybody know that did happen. Julie Henderson on our organizing group is placing in the chat the links to each of our candidates' websites, so you can check them out yourself after this as well. Reminder that you can advance vote and you can mail in your ballot. There's so many ways to participate in the election this year. I have my mail-in ballot here on my floor that I'm going to fill out after this debate. You can send it in. Make sure you get out. Make sure you get out and vote. I would like to say that. I would also like to say, unrelated to that, if you're having any tech issues, you can message Nahum, who is one of the co-hosts on here. You'll notice that only the co-hosts are able to chat. We wanted to make sure we could keep the focus on the debate. I also wanted to, I said this in the beginning, but I just wanted to mention, please keep yourself on mute. If you go off mute, you will be muted. If you go off mute several times on purpose to be disruptive, we will remove you from the debate. We really want this to be an open conversation. We also want to make sure that everyone here, our candidates, are given the respect that they deserve for being here, and that you're given the respect you deserve as an audience to be able to listen to this conversation without getting interrupted. So you have been warned. I want to shout out to Van City Credit Union, who's been supporting all of these debates across the country, helping GreenPAC make this happen. So thank you, Van City. Okay, and I've just got 2 more pieces of business before we get into the meat of this. 1, timekeeping. So for the candidates, we are going to be showing them a colored card. Lisa, can you demonstrate? The yellowish green card is going to be your 30-second mark, so you know to wrap up, and the red card is going to be you're done. I'll give you a few seconds. If you keep going, I'm going to lovingly step in. Okay, and one last thing, just to let people know, the format is going to be, there's 4 preset questions that were set by GreenPAC. There's 4 questions that we as the local organizing committee put together, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. Just so you know right now, if you have any questions you want to ask the candidates, please send them into the questions co-host, which is my friend Anusha. She's listed as questions. You can send them in right from the start, and she'll be going through, to pick out the ones that we'll have time for at the end that I will be asking at the end of the debate. One note for the candidates as well, you each have something called 3 wild cards. What this means is you have a 1 minute, 3 times during the debate to rebut any of the statements that are made by the other candidates. So basically what's going to happen is at the end of each question I'll ask if anybody has a wild card, use your hand raise function, and if you do, you can use one. We'll just be tracking how many. So you have 3 total if you decide you want to rebut any of the other candidates. All right, enough talking. Let's get into it. I'm not running for office, so no one else wants to hear from me anymore. I'm going to pass it over to our candidates. I'm going to invite them to give us a 1-minute introductory statement for each one. And we are going to start with the NDP with Alejandra. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much. To me, equity and sustainability should be our economic growth principle. What we've had up to now has been inequality and consumption, and it's failing us. That means taking on corporate interests, which have historically been represented by both liberals and conservatives in this country. For a good economy, people need to be healthy, educated, and housed. And without climate action and environmental sustainability, we can't have any of this. The NDP has a very bold plan for climate action, affordable housing, improved health with farmer care and dental, respecting Indigenous people's rights, and paying for this, which is really important. There are companies that profited massively from the pandemic. We need to go to the wealthiest people and to the profiteers to make sure that they're helping to rebuild the economy. That's the only way that we're going to actually rebuild in a more fair way. And I think that historically, this is the moment of crisis with the affordable housing crisis, a lack of action on climate. It's a moment to be bold and to choose what you believe in.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Julie for her 1-minute introductory.
Thank you. As we come out of COVID, we're asking ourselves what kind of world we want to live in. And I don't think that it's the world that we lived in prior to the pandemic. I think we want to live in a more sustainable world. I'm a climate activist. Before I entered politics, I co-founded a group called Project Neutral. It's an organization committed to helping individuals, households, and communities to reduce their emissions. I deliberately chose the Liberal Party because they were serious about climate change and had the best chance of being elected and implementing it. Since we were elected in late 2015, we've introduced Canada's first ever national climate plan. We became the first government to set climate target and lay out a path to meeting it. We've invested over $100 billion towards climate action and clean growth. In this election, the Liberal Party has the most detailed plan and the best plan to tackle climate change in the world. And the Liberal Party also has the best chance to be elected and to be able to implement it. This is an important discussion this evening. I want to thank GreenPAC for organizing and for all of you for joining us today. And I look forward to the conversation this evening.
Thank you. And finally, Adrian Curry with your 1-minute introductory.
Thank you, Sabrina. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Julie Zarowitz. Thank you, Angela Bravo, for being here. This is going to be important. This is shaping out to be the climate election. In fact, climate change is at the top of a lot of voters' interest right now. What we're hearing at the door is that we want credible action on climate change. We need to stop building pipelines. We need to stop fracking. We need to stop resource extraction and focus on real plans for climate action. The planet is burning up. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to be toast, literally. So which party has the best plan to tackle climate change? Well, I would posit that it's the Green Party. We were invented to deal with the climate and the environment. Our specialty is climate change. If you want to focus on solving the climate emergency, look to a party that has a credible plan, that's been working on it for entire existence, and we're not messing around. I would say that the other parties are blowing hot air, and we need to really focus on that here in Davenport and here in Toronto.
Thank you, everybody. All right, so the first question, and I'll just let you know what the order is now, will be Liberal, NDP, and then Green. Will you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? What would you do to address how women and other marginalized groups have been disproportionately affected by both the pandemic and our environmental crises? And reminder that you have 2 minutes. All right, so Julie, go ahead. Oh, Julie, you're on mute.
I know. Usually I'm not muted. Anyways, I should get used to that. Anyways, thanks for that. I think 2 really important questions. I sort of put them sort of as 2 questions. So as I mentioned before, the Liberal government has already committed, and the Liberal Party has already committed to, and we have already funded over the last almost 6 years, a green and just recovery. Since we were elected in late 2015, as I mentioned, we have invested over $100 billion to fight climate change and to build a clean economy. And that includes $3.6 billion for green recovery. We're moving Canada towards a low carbon future and economy where we're tackling climate change at the same time as we are transforming and growing our economy. In terms of environmental justice, we do know that a disproportionate number of people who live in environmental hazard areas are Indigenous, lower income, or racialized communities. And so if you look at our platform, a re-elected Liberal government will require that our Minister of Environment and Climate Change will examine the link between race, socioeconomic status, and exposure to environmental risk with new legislation, and to develop a strategy to address environmental justice, which builds on the work that we have already done on the Canadian Environment Protection Act, or CEPA, which would recognize for the first time ever the right to healthy environment in federal law. I also want to point out that I have a wonderful, wonderful colleague, Lenore Zan from Cumberland, Colchester, and Nova Scotia, who also introduced a bill which was called Creating a National Standard Respecting Environmental Racism and Environmental Justice Act. It is a private member's bill that I did support. And basically it was trying to ensure that we develop a national strategy to promote efforts across Canada to advance environmental justice and to assess, prevent, and address environmental racism. So I look forward to continuing this important work.
Thank you. Alejandra, you're next.
Unfortunately, under this government, fossil fuel subsidies to big polluters have gone up and emissions have gone up, and Canada has the worst record of the G7 countries. So I don't think we have much to be proud of on this score. We need to do a lot more. And you know, I think that the NDP's commitment to eliminating fossil fuel subsidies is absolutely essential to cut emissions by at least 60% by 2030. But the disproportionate way that these intersecting crises affect equity-seeking people, marginalized groups, means that it has to be an all-in plan. Housing for all can also have a dimension that means that we're promising housing, all new starts, to be net zero by 2025, but we also have to keep people housed while we're doing that. We should stop the sale of federal lands. There's the Canada Post land at Queen and Dufferin. That kind of sale, the NDP is committed to stopping the sale of federal lands and building quality, affordable housing and environmental environment at the highest level of environmental standards there. Transit, you know, like the Dufferin bus is the most used bus route in North America, but we're the only city in North America that doesn't have provincial or federal funding for transit. We don't have a mobility strategy in this country. We need to get rid of transit fares because they disproportionately affect people with lower incomes, lift the income floor for people so that they can actually do better. And I think that part of the pandemic recovery has to be the jobs that come with climate action, and the kind of investments that the NDP is intending to make will create hundreds of thousands of jobs through retrofits, through the expansion of infrastructure, through the investment in clean drinking water for Indigenous people. And so separating environment and economy just doesn't work. They have to go together. And the only way we're going to do that is to actually go to the big polluters, to the wealthiest corporations that have benefited during the pandemic, and say that they should help with the rebuild fairly.
Thank you. And Adrian, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Am I muted now? Yes, you can hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, yes, definitely the Green Party commits to a green economic recovery. The first thing we would do is we introduce universal basic income. We've seen through the pandemic and through CERB that the government can do it, and it can be distributed equally, fairly, and rather quickly. The UBI benefits everyone. For women, it helps women look after their families. It helps them with job securities. It helps them look after the elderly, their children. It helps them, give them some sort of support when it comes to looking for employment. And the second thing is universal daycare for women. Women have a hard time looking after their children, especially when it comes to working 9 to 5. And we've seen that because of the pandemic, they are the most likely to lose their job in a downturn, and they've been disproportionately affected by that. With universal income and the most marginalized communities, same thing. They have the opportunity to look after their basic needs, whether it's rent, food, pharmaceuticals, transportation needs. And when it comes to a sustainable green economic recovery, there is no climate justice without social justice. And likewise, there is no social justice without climate justice. So we have to look after the environment. The two go hand in hand. If the climate fails, it's the most vulnerable that will suffer, and it will be disproportionately women who suffer. So this is why the Green Party focuses on climate justice the most, because without a healthy planet, we are all perishable. We are all susceptible to being hurt and being disadvantaged. So it's important to get the climate right. It's important to get climate justice right. Otherwise, we're basically looking in the wrong direction and wasting our time.
Thank you. And I see we have two wild cards. I saw Alejandra and then I saw Julie, so we'll go in that order. Alejandra, you've got a minute, and then Julie, you've got a minute.
Great, thank you. $10 a day childcare is something the NDP ran on in 2015, in which we support. Pharmacare is absolutely essential. Dental care, every day I talk to people in this riding who work full-time and are suffering with pain. Full access to broadband as like a public infrastructure and more affordable internet and phone is a really important equity principle. Lifting the income floor. The NDP is going to expand access to employment insurance, making sure that it's at $2,000 minimum, and start working on guaranteed livable income. As Adrian said, we've shown that we can actually do this work, and we believe the federal government should have shown leadership on offering 10 paid sick days. At the start of the pandemic, Jagmeet Singh asked for that 22 times in Parliament and would have 100% supported this, and also getting to a $20 federal minimum wage, which is a way to set the standard for the rest of the country. And I also think that the recovery has to include a way for temporary foreign workers, students who are 1 out of 20 people in this country don't have access to permanent residency and therefore can't be part of the decision-making process.
Okay.
Julie, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We're talking about lots of things here. So look, I'm delighted that Alejandra's talking about the environment and the economy go hand in hand. We've been talking about that since late 2015. Fossil fuel subsidies, I agree, we've got to eliminate that far more quickly. We are committed to doing that by 2023. What I would ask is that we actually make it transparent. A lot of the dollars we actually give to the fossil fuel industries deal with things like wage subsidies or investment in innovation that's going to help them reduce their emissions. So we want to make sure that it's very clear what it is that we're talking about in terms of fossil fuel subsidies. Childcare, the Liberal parties already, or the Liberal governments are already implementing national childcare. 8 provinces and territories are putting into effect. We know that Ontario will come on stream if the Liberal government is elected. In terms of pharmacare, we're also implementing that. We have PEI right now as the first signatory. We're working out on that model. We're working on that model and trying to make it work there before we introduce it to the rest of the country. And GBI, Guaranteed Basic Income, I introduced a private members bill, and I am the champion within the Liberal Party, and I will be working on it if I am reelected. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thanks, everyone. All right, great. So on to question 2. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is our overarching law to protect the health of Canadians and the environment. The act has not been significantly amended since 1999, despite major changes in our understanding of toxic substances in our environment. A recent bill introduced in the last Parliament did not make it past first reading. Will you support getting this bill reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority? And for this one, we'll start with Adrian, and then we'll go to Alejandra, and then we'll go to Julie.
Hello, thank you for the question. Will I support the improvement of the Environmental Protection Act? Yes, definitely. We need to strengthen this bill and make it a priority. The fact that it hasn't been updated since 1999 speaks to a lack of priority for the Liberals and the Conservatives. If they were concerned about this, they would have definitely pushed it through and made it improvements to it, but they haven't. A Green Party will make this a cornerstone of our agenda. Again, a healthy environment is key to our health as individuals and moving forward. There are many toxic substances in our society, and we need to make changes to this. Corporations and companies are getting away with literally murder, and they're not being held accountable. Accountability and transparency is key, and we'll make sure that this bill is strong. It has credible priorities, targets, and metrics that are going to be reached and that are going to be aimed for each year. And it's important to move this and make it a top legislative priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alejandra.
So I think that this is another area where we can agree, Adrian. The NDP platform already includes a strengthened Canadian Environmental Protection Act to protect our health and the environment from toxics, including cosmetics and household goods. I think also eliminating single-use plastics will also help here because we know how they break down and they enter the ecosystem and all life, and also banning the exporting of plastics would help. The NDP is also proposing an environmental bill of rights to protect land and water. And also I think this is really important because it's the Office of Environmental Justice, and that's to address the disproportionate impact that pollution and loss of biodiversity has on Indigenous, low-income, and racialized peoples, who are often the victims of the toxics that are in everyday household goods, or a cashier that's got to handle receipts all day. Like, these things disproportionately impact people with lower incomes, racialized people. These are the things that are found at the dollar store. I just want to share that this is a really important issue for me. When I ran for city council in 2006, I included a community right to know bylaw promise in the city of Toronto. And then when I was appointed to the Board of Health, I fought really hard and worked with community groups so that we could have an environmental disclosure bylaw in the city of Toronto, which is a leading bylaw. So I think that federal inaction up to this point has been very detrimental to human health, to all life, and to our environment. This is the kind of situation where we need to be more in a hurry. We're constantly told that what's realistic is winning government, but in fact, having a stronger NDP voice in Parliament could push this kind of agenda forward, particularly in what we expect to be a minority Parliament that's coming up. We need to have a very strong voice from Davenport voicing our concerns around toxics.
Go ahead.
Did you want me to go?
Yeah, go for
Okay.
it.
Thank you. Look, first, absolutely, absolutely, I will support getting this bill reintroduced. I do appreciate you highlighting the work that we've done to update this legislation. I don't agree with Adrian. We spent a good chunk of our first mandate actually studying SEPA and how to improve it. When Minister Wilkinson was appointed as the Minister of the Environment, this was absolutely one of his top priorities to introduce this legislation. Because of COVID, it's actually slowed us down. And because of a lot of, the fact that we had a toxic parliament and weren't able to move fast on some of these environmental measures is one of the reasons that we introduced this so late in the day. Look, I personally am also very vested in this. I actually went to grade school in the riding on Franklin Avenue when it used to be surrounded by paint factories and auto body shops. And there used to be a lot of toxins, and a lot of us were very exposed to that in the area. So to me, it's really important for us to have this introduced. I also think that we want to make sure that we want to be open to all the best ideas, all parties, all leaders across the country to improving the bill and making sure we have something strong moving forward. We are committed as Liberals to a full review of the use of pesticides. We are also committed to requiring that consumer products such as cosmetics and cleaning products give people the information they need to know what's in them. We've already started banning single-use plastics, so other people can talk about it, but we are already starting to do it. We have our first single-use plastics beginning to be banned by the end of this year, beginning of next year. And there's a number of other measures that we're looking at. I will tell you though, I do think that Europe is ahead of us on this. And I also do think that we need to ask our corporations to step up and make sure that before they put something out, that they make sure that it is safe. Thank you.
All right. The third question, and I will let you know the order, and then you can just go when the other person's finished. Oh, not the third question. Sorry, Alejandra has a wild card. Alejandra would like to use for a second. Please go ahead. You have 1
Yeah,
minute.
thanks. I just want to argue that this parliament wasn't in fact toxic. The NDP tried really hard to actually put this election off, has been supporting the Liberals on whenever there's been an agenda item that could help people. You know, yes, we've talked about a lot of things in the past. Electoral reform, which was promised by this government for the first time by the Liberals 100 years ago. That's not happened. Maybe one day it'll make it into the agenda. Pharmacare, which was promised 30 years ago, now dropped. You know, I think that the reality is that NDP ideas, NDP vision, social democratic visions actually drive change in this country. And whenever we've had something good, it's been in a minority government, we would have collaborated to do any of these things with the Liberals had they been willing. But what I think people recognize is a power grab, so that in a majority, they don't have to be accountable to a strong opposition, which is putting people ahead of profit and corporate interests. And ultimately, this item is about who has the fortitude to take on the corporations.
And we have a wild card response from Julie.
Thank you. I think Alejandra mentioned earlier that it was the NDP idea around sick days. I will tell you, a lot of the improvements that we made to our COVID emergency supports came from all parties. It wasn't just the NDP, it was the Conservatives, and it was also the Liberals. We all put our best ideas, and it was not just the NDPs that put forward that idea. I'll also say to you again, pharmacare, we're in the process of implementing it. We've already announced our agreement with PEI, and we are using that as a pilot as healthcare was done when that was introduced in the 1960s. We piloted in Saskatchewan before it actually was introduced to the rest of the country. And in terms of a toxic parliament, the NDP was one of the parties that obfuscated and filibustered to slow down legislation, including making deals with the Conservative Party a number of times. So to be honest, I would prefer if we just talked only about the environment here, but since other people are bringing up other issues, then I'm happy to make sure that I could also set the record straight.
All right. And Adrian, did you want to use your wild card?
I'll save it.
You're saving it. Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm going to save it for another question.
Great. Well, what's a debate without a little bit of fire, right? I will just say at this point, it would be so lovely for us all to be in person, minus COVID. It would be so lovely for us all to be able to see each other and to go enjoy a beverage after this debate, but we are all at home and we'll enjoy a beverage after this debate by ourselves. However, if you would like to turn your camera on, we'd love to see your face. It'll make feel a little bit more like a debate. But you don't have to, obviously. This is being recorded, so that may be a factor for you, but if you would like to turn your camera on, we'd love to see you. All right, the third question. Indigenous people play a critical role in environmental solutions. Will you implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Will you invest in Indigenous-led land use planning and establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas? So we will go NDP, then Green and Liberal, and just feel free to go after your fellow panelists is finished.
New Democrats believe in a nation-to-nation relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people wherever they live in this country. And that means recognizing Indigenous rights and sovereignty. I want to say that it was Romeo Saganash, an NDP member, who first introduced a bill in Parliament to recognize the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Of course, we support that. And we would implement all the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but also in the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit Peoples recommendations. Indigenous people are stewards of land and water. They have knowledge that we need as a society. And so they need to have a seat at the highest level at decision-making tables around anything to do with climate and the environment, and partnership sometimes, but also sometimes following their lead. We need to prioritize investments in infrastructure, water, housing, human health, education to repair the damage and the wrongs that have been done by this country through colonization, which is very much our present, not our past, as the Prime Minister said. We owe a debt to particularly Indigenous children in this country, residential school survivors, And one thing that I'm so disappointed at is that this Liberal government continues to take Indigenous children to court, to tribunal, residential school survivors. And I think that the comments that indicated that, you know, the uncovering of the bodies of Indigenous children who died in a genocidal policy in this country, and I think the lack of accountability for how this is our collective responsibility is something that I think differentiates my view of this significantly from our MP, who has sometimes, with respect, not been fully aware of the extent of this crisis and how to respond.
Adrian, you can go ahead.
So, so will I implement UNDRIP? Definitely. The Green Party makes this a priority. The fact that the Liberals governments have not moved on this in the last 6 years speaks volume to their priorities. This was not anything near something that they wanted to act upon. The Green Party will abolish the Indian Act and introduce nation-to-nation discourse and negotiations. We must respect treaty rights and respect Indigenous peoples as the people that they were when we first met them. Will we invest in Indigenous-led land use planning and establishment of Indigenous protected conservation areas? Definitely, yes. The Green Party believes in this, and we trust the Indigenous peoples on this. These policies should already be in place and should be acted upon. Indigenous people understand the environment, they know the land, and we should trust them and look to them when it comes to leadership and stewardship on land issues. If we are to protect ourselves from climate change, we must look towards Indigenous peoples because they are the ones that were here first and they understand the environment. Similarly, with the missing and murdered and Indigenous women and girls, the action plan has only been paid lip service to in the last few years. It's a shame, and this has to change. The Green Party will definitely implement the action plan as soon as we get into office, or push the Liberals or whoever is in government to act on the action plan. Reconciliation is a must, and this can only happen with accountability and responsibility. Again, we've been hearing lip service and hot air coming from the Liberals over the last few years, and this has to change. Indigenous peoples are still heeding boiled water advisories on their lands. This is unacceptable in 2021. We're in the 21st century. This must change. Similarly, they're still dealing with mercury, with the effects of mercury poison in their water and in their land. This is equally unacceptable. We need to treat them with respect, give them the dignity of as human beings, and treat them as equals, and not just, again, pay lip service and say we're going to do something and then toss them aside the moment we get into power.
Would you like me to start? Okay, I will go. So in terms of implementing UNDRIP, good news. We absolutely, as the Liberal Party and previously as a Liberal government, we support UNDRIP, and we actually passed the act into law. So it is now the law of the land. So we're now, and what the law requires is that we work in consultation, cooperation with Indigenous people in Canada and identify measures to align federal laws with UNDRIP. So I absolutely support this effort. And it is important work that needs to be done on reconciliation. I will say to you as well that Indigenous peoples and their ancestors have long been stewards and managers of the land and water and leaders in the ecosystem conservation in Canada, and we absolutely must continue to partner with them. We have done already a lot with them. We have, I'm trying to think, I had some specific measures now. We have introduced the Indigenous, we launched the Indigenous Guardian pilot in 2017, and we helped establish over 30 Indigenous protected and conservation areas. In our current platform, we continue to commit to expanding both of those very successful programs. We're also committed to conserving more land and inland waters and marine and coastal areas, and Indigenous-led conservation will play a central role in this effort. And then we're also committing another $340 million for new funding to specifically support Indigenous leadership in nature conservation. I will say to you on truth and reconciliation, we are ready we have already started implementing 80% of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations that we are either fully responsible at the federal level or partially responsible with the provinces and territories. Boil water advisories, we came in 2015 with 101 long-term boil water advisories. We've eliminated 109 because they grew, and every other remaining of the 52 left has a project plan, resources, and a timeline to actually address it. Thank you.
Great. All right, so we're going to change it up a little bit here. Very exciting rapid fire round. So here's the introduction to this question. COVID-19 has brought to light the links between the climate crisis, the human impact on nature, and the rise of global pandemics like SARS, Ebola, and nearly 3/4 of infectious diseases. Scientists generally agree that COVID originated in other animal species and spread to humans in large part because of the pressures on these species brought on by land use changes and unsustainable consumption. These factors are also, of course, leading causes in climate change. So we're going to ask you 4 yes or no questions, yes or no. And they each deal with the immediate measures that the government can take to address these interlinked crises, to protect the health of Canadians as we emerge from the worst of this very difficult pandemic. I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to request a yes or no from each candidate. Yes or no. That's it. We will go. I know. It's going to be tough. I know it's hard. Yes or no?
We were told we had 30 seconds.
Yeah.
One.
Oh, all right. Okay, you can have your 30 seconds. Get your yes or no in there somewhere in your 30 seconds. That's why you're all excellent candidates. Good work. All right. We will start with Julie, then we'll go to Adrian, and then we'll go to Alejandra for the questions. So here's the first one, 30 seconds each. Will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030? Julie, go ahead. 30 seconds.
Yes, the Liberals are committed to protecting 30% of the land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030. We are also committed to 25% of it by 2025, and we are well en route to achieving that target. When we came into office in late 2015, Canada protected less than 1% of our oceans. We're now at 14%, and we also are protecting a landmass equal to 3.5 times the size of Nova Scotia. We've made the largest investments in nature conservation in Canadian history, and we have an ambitious plan to do more around national parks, urban parks, and we have the track record on nature protection to get us there. Thanks.
Adrian, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, we will definitely develop a new credible plan to halt and reverse climate change loss. We are the Green Party. The environment is our specialty. We were invented to deal with climate change and issues around the environment. It's good that the other parties are pledging this, and it's about time that they're catching up to what we've been pressing for many years now.
Okay, Alejandra, go ahead.
Yes, the NDP will 100% do this, protect species at risk and meet Canada's commitments around this, but we'll do it in legislation through an environmental bill of rights that would protect 30% of land and water. And also, I think the equity dimension that's really important here is around the Office of Environmental Justice to make sure that we are prioritizing Indigenous people and marginalized communities who are disproportionately affected by loss of species and water damage.
Well done, everyone. The second of our rapid fire. Will you commit to require all sectors to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2030 and make it law? Julie, then Adrian, then Alejandra. Julie, go ahead.
Thank you. We are absolutely fully committed to achieving net zero by 2050. The Liberal government has done more to fight climate change than any other government in Canadian history. We're committed to achieving our 2030 climate targets of reducing emissions by 40 to 45% by 2005 levels, which is in line with where science says we need to go, and we will reach net zero by 2050. We do have an additional plan that's outlined in our platform that lays out our more ambitious targets. Thanks.
Is it my turn?
Yep, go ahead, Adrian.
Yes, we definitely will reduce our emissions. Our platform calls for a 60% reduction on emissions from 2005 levels by 2030, with enforceable targets and timelines starting in 2025. I would respectfully say that the other parties will not live up to this commitment because they've been released their platforms and they are nowhere near what the reduction limits should be in order for us to keep our increase in the temperature by 1.5 degrees. So I challenge them on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alejandra.
Yes, absolutely. The NDP will cut at least 50% of carbon emissions by 2030, allowing us to meet the 1.5 degree target that we need to avert catastrophe. Unfortunately, under the Liberals, emissions went up. They're at the worst in the G7, and of course, they bought a pipeline.
Great. Will you push your party's leadership to end government subsidies for fossil fuels? Go ahead, Julie.
I'm so sorry, I lost myself. Sorry.
All fine. Don't worry about it.
So the answer is absolutely yes. Look, our government has committed to eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. We originally said we would do it by 2025. Our current platform says we'll do it by 2023. I will personally tell you, this is something that I'm very passionate about. I've pushed our ministers to go even faster. I have mentioned this earlier on in the debate tonight, that I actually think what we need to do is make it fully transparent. What are the subsidies we are giving to the fossil fuel industry? Because there's this big debate between direct and indirect, and I think people need to know what the differences are, but I think we have to make it fully transparent. What do we give and what are we eliminating?
Thank you. Adrian, go ahead.
Yes, definitely we will push our leadership, but we don't have to. We're the Green Party. It's in our DNA. It's been part of our platform since many years now. I just want to note that the Liberals gave 16 billion in subsidies to oil companies in 2020 during a pandemic. I question whether they will push their leadership enough to end subsidies to fossil fuels. Thank you.
And Alejandra.
Yes, the NDP is already committed to eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. Under the Liberals, more federal money has gone to big polluters, and however you account for that, those are the wrong priorities. It's even more than what was going on under the Harper Conservatives. The string and they can argue that that money is gone to like remediate, do cleanup, but the reality is that the companies haven't invested in cleanup and they haven't invested in the workers. Right, a lot of the workers who are displaced by extractive industries are being replaced by automation.
Great, thanks everybody. All right, our last one is a bit of a group hug question. Okay, will you join the all-party climate caucus to work collaboratively with MPs from across the aisle on policy solutions? Julie, then Adrian, then Alejandra. Oh, Julie, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. Well, I already have joined them. So I've been joining them for the last few years. It's something I'm very passionate about. To be honest, I think that there's ways we could make it even more effective as a group. So absolutely, I've already joined them. I've already been working with them. I think that we could actually make it more effective as we move forward. And I hope I have the privilege to be able to continue to represent Davenport as part of this all-party climate caucus.
Thank you. Adrian, go ahead.
Yes, we will definitely join the all-party climate caucus to work together with MPs. The Green Party believes in nonpartisanship and working together in Parliament to solve problems. Our leader believes in this and has actively said this time and time again, and so do I. This is how you solve problems, and we believe in minority governments because it forces parties to work together to solve problems for the benefit of all Canadians.
Thank you.
My answer is yes. Obviously, I will join a caucus whose purpose is to take on this climate emergency. I've spent 15 years doing facilitation, bringing workers and community groups together, environmental organizations. Collaboration is in my DNA, and I think these issues transcend partisanship.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. All right, so those are the questions that were preset by GreenPact that we wanted to ask. We're going to go into a session now of questions that are going to be asked by members of the organizing committee that were written by us collectively and collaboratively. And I have to say the members of our organizing team are quite knowledgeable themselves. And so I'm going to introduce each one and then they will ask a question. And I just want to take a moment to continue to remind the audience that they can send their questions to the questions person in the chat. And she's collecting those up and we will ask as many of those as we can before the end of the debate. I also just want to give a shout out to Ryerson Leadership Lab, who is providing the soon to be renamed Ryerson Leadership Lab, who is providing our Zoom tonight. I did forget to thank them earlier. I also work for them, so don't tell my boss. Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to pass this over to Julie, who is associated with the Canadian Associations of Physicians for the Environment and the Canadian Climate Psychiatry Alliance. Julie, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Hi, everyone. So everyday members of the Davenport riding are suffering from illnesses caused by air pollution. And the main source of that is vehicular emissions. And this is avoidable. Research has linked air pollution to respiratory illness, cardiovascular illnesses like heart attacks and stroke, as well as cancer, depression, and dementia. We know that active transportation and the use of public transit are known to be good for health while reducing air pollution. If elected, what will you do to ensure that air pollution standards are improved? And the order, if we didn't say it, is NDP, Green Party, then Liberal.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you. So transit to me is absolutely essential. And I talked about the Dufferin bus and the lack of attention and support that the TTC gets for operations, which is absolutely essential because everyone wants to build infrastructure, but we don't have any help in Toronto for operating our transit. We also need to make transit more affordable in addition to funding infrastructure for expansion and for operations, so the NDP will help municipalities eliminate fees and fares, which are disproportionately hurt low-income people and are creating situations of racism, of enforcement. The NDP will electrify all transit by 2030, and think about all those dirty diesel trains that are polluting right now are riding. We've had lots of promises in the past about electrification. The people that are most harmed are disproportionately lower income and children and vulnerable people. The NDP will also develop a public inner city bus program. Would have been my preference for the Liberals to buy the Greyhound route instead of the pipeline, but here we are. And the NDP will do all of this by doubling the Canada Community Building Fund. And I just want to say myself that my commitment to transit advocacy also extends to supporting TTC riders, transit advocates, doing leadership development work. It's going to take all of us together advocating for new lines, more operational funding, and lower fares to make this really work. To me, transit is about equity, it's about economy, and about environment simultaneously. People who don't have access to safe, regular transit are excluded. And I think the lack of the support for the grid and the support for regular running of a clean fleet of buses and a clean and clean mobility. I would also add that cycling infrastructure has to connect with transit infrastructure for it to be truly universal. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Whose turn is it?
I think Adrian, why don't you go and then Julie will go after you. Yeah, Adrian, go ahead.
So to combat air pollution, this is something that I, as a cycling advocate, have been working on for decades now. As a cycling advocate, I believe in sustainable transportation, active transportation. Cycling infrastructure helps reduce congestion, helps reduce smog. If you notice that we have fewer, if not any smog alerts anymore, the increased cycling infrastructure is part of that. We need more mobility lanes because they help everyone. Fewer cars on the road means less pollution. More people cycling means people are healthier. They can survive air pollution. We need more support for transit. Transit is continually underfunded. And even now the federal government they're still paying lip service to it. They give a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there. Let's really invest in transit and electrify all across the country. Similarly, with our transportation systems, we need to give subsidies and tax credits for electric cars. We need to encourage people to buy electric cars and to put charging stations around the world around the country. And this can be done through subsidies for small businesses and tax credit to encourage them to build charging stations and to come up with creative solutions for this all across the country, because this is one way we can reduce pollution and make our citizens healthier all across the board. Thank you.
Okay, so much to say in so little time. Adrian, you're going to be happy to hear we've made historic investments in public transit almost every single year. It's never been done before. So I think our latest was another $14 billion earlier this year. I believe in transformational change in terms of how we fund this. Toronto's the only city in all of North America that whose transit is funded by the fare box. That needs to change. But I also think that we need to change how we actually fund and what we fund sort of provincially, and how we make sure that the province is actually accountable for the dollars that we actually give. You'll also be happy to hear that this is something that is Davenport led, and the leadership from our community is when I was first elected, I made sure to talk to our Minister of Infrastructure. I told him infrastructure in Davenport means not only public transit, but also safe bike infrastructure. All the public transit dollars that we actually send down to the city can also be used for bike infrastructure, which is why you actually see a massive expansion over the last few years in bike infrastructure across the city. I'll also say to you that we are committed to air pollution, eliminating air pollution and cleaner and providing cleaner air. So we have a lot of investments. We are providing $5,000 towards zero emissions vehicle purchases for over 500,000 Canadians. We're building 50,000 more zero emission vehicle chargers. We're requiring at least half of all passenger vehicles sold in Canada be zero emissions by 2030, and all to be zero emissions by 2035. We are charting a path towards net zero buildings across the country. So I could go on, but you should look at our platform. There's a number of measures that we are taking to make sure that we continue to have clean air, and that we are starting to shift out of our cars and into more public transit and bike infrastructure. Thank you.
Great. So next up, we're going to have Anusha from Global Shapers, who also happened to be one of the co-organizers of this event in 2019. We will have Adrian and then Julie and then Alejandra respond. So Anusha, go ahead.
Hello. So my question is, as we know, there has been massive drought creating vulnerabilities to wildfires and affecting farmers in the west of Canada and the US. The drought is likely to lead to markedly reduced harvests this year in affected areas. And as the climate emergency continues, farmers are more likely to experience crop failure and food shortages, likely affecting supply and prices, making food less affordable. This will disproportionately affect low-income households. As an elected official, how would you work to protect agriculture workers and ensure food security?
So this is my turn to go first. That's it. That's a good question. But the real solution is with climate change. If climate change is going to continue, we're going to have climate emergencies and climate disasters, then food prices are going to continue to go up and low-income households will continue to suffer. We have to look to the real solutions come with climate change. No more pipelines. Let's build wind farms and solar farms. No more subsidies to oil companies unless they're going to transition to the green economy or clean tech. Let's retrain oil workers so they can work in the green tech environment industry and support workers. This is the best way to support low-income households. In order to mitigate the damages that will happen, UBI, Universal Basic Income, to top up to $2,000 to top up income when it comes to rent, so they can pay their bills, they can buy groceries, they can look after their pharmacists, they can look after their prescription drugs. Pharmacare will help significantly. National daycare will help significantly when it comes to women. these are all ways to help low-income households, but as I'll repeat, we have to tackle climate change, because as rough as it was this year, it's going to get harder next year. This will probably be the coldest summer of your lives. Think about that. The coldest summer of your lives. That means that continually going forward, climate change will affect us significantly. So if we want to look after low income and vulnerable people, let's deal with climate change, because that's the best way to help them out.
Go ahead, Julie.
This is a tough and excellent question, by the way, so I'm frantically trying to find all my answers. So look, here's what we've promised to do. We are going to increase support to farmers to develop and adopt agricultural management practices to reduce emissions, store carbon in healthy soil, and enhance resiliency. And I know that we've also talked a lot about rotational sort of soil crop rotation, so that we can make sure that we continue to have healthy agricultural land in order to ensure that we have, continue to have healthy food here in Canada. I will say to you as well, we've invested a substantial amount of money into food security. I will say to you that we have a lot of leadership in our own community, with the Community Food Centres of Canada actually located in our riding, and they have been heavily invested by the federal government, particularly through COVID, and I think ongoing, not only sort of in our urban centres, but also across Indigenous reserves across our country. So I will tell you, this is a key priority for our government. I'll also say to you, the other thing I feel we need to do is I think we need to actually start mapping water. And this is something countries do around the world. And I think that for us to be able to better manage climate change, ensure that we continue to have healthy farmland, and ensure food security for the future, I think that is one of the things that we should be looking at. Thanks so much.
Thanks. There's a food crisis in this country. It's longstanding. There are inequities and exploitation throughout the food system, from how we produce it, who cultivates it, how we process it, and how we sell it. There's a concentration of ownership of the food system, and it's a big corporate machine that we would need to take on to do this kind of work. I'll say that specifically, New Democrats will create a Canadian food strategy that's really focused on securing food supply and supporting farmers and producers to transition to sustainable and equitable systems. That includes protecting supply management. There's also an important piece around cutting up the middle people, and that is connecting communities to farmers. I think if we could created local food hubs that could be, that are already being informally done and very effectively in Davenport, scale those up so that we have sort of the field to table approach. We also need a strategy for food waste. There's a lot of food gets wasted in this country. It contributes. It's a terrible thing, and it also create the food waste is something that we need to take on for issues of equity. The NDP would also invest in supporting biodiversity and pollinator health to get off some of the more harmful practices. But for the workers themselves, I want to come back to that. There has to be a pathway to permanent residency for agricultural workers in this country who died disproportionately during COVID from the Caribbean, from Latin America, warehoused and exploited. And I also think that the NDP believes in strengthening rights for workers, including agricultural workers. And that means making it possible for them to join a union that could collectively bargain for them. Going back to climate change, we just don't have the time to wait. Like, the food crisis is here, and that's why we need more New Democrats in Ottawa to push for action.
Great, thank you. So our next question originally came from our member Ben, but he unfortunately, from Global Shapers, but he unfortunately had to step out at the last minute. So another one of our organizers, Nahum, who is himself a community organizer in Davenport, has kindly stepped in to ask the question. Thank you, Nahum, go ahead.
Thanks. So Davenport is at the nexus of a rapidly changing city, with major upgrades underway to the GO train corridors in the riding and a new subway soon to open at the north end. Already, the population has been increasing faster than the rest of Toronto, exacerbating housing inequality in the riding. Housing insecure people are more at risk from climate disasters. What will you do to ensure that there is enough affordable, sustainable, climate resilient housing, both subsidized and market rate, in one of the most transit and bike friendly neighborhoods in North America?
Thank you so much. So we'll go Julie and then Adrian and then Alejandra.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the question. I think it's an important one. So for too long, the federal government has been outside of the housing market. And I think that when we came in late 2015, we very shortly thereafter introduced a Canada National Housing Strategy, which is a 10-year plan investing $72 billion to create affordable housing, as well as to deal with the chronic homelessness that we have in our city. We also introduced legislation recognizing the right of Canadians to access adequate housing. We have already helped more than 2 million Canadians find places to call home through our new builds, through our repairs, through renovations and rent subsidies. And we've also introduced and signed the Canada Housing Benefit, which has totaled $4 billion. And that has provided some cost match funding that's helped over 300,000 Canadians pay rent. If you look at our platform and you look at everything that we have introduced in terms of how we can make sure that everyone can find an affordable place to live, we have had a ranking by various different independent people who has ranked the different housing platforms of the different parties. We have received the highest ranking out of 10 in terms of the breadth and the depth of our planned supports and what we're trying to accomplish. I don't know if I have any seconds left, but I think that, for people who want more details, I can read it all, but if you go to liberal.ca and look under the housing plan for all, you will see a very detailed plan that I think will address the key question. Thank you.
Thanks. Adrian?
Thank you for that. In terms of affordable housing, this is something that's very important for Davenport, and this is something the Green Party has thought long and hard about. First of all, we would build way more affordable housing for individuals. We will make it so that developers have to increase the amount of affordable housing units in their developments by more than 5 or 10%, but up to 40%, and with real affordable units, not something that's going to cost $600,000 for 500 square foot. Second, we can expand land trusts, make it affordable for people to buy land and let them build what they need, what they want on it, no matter what it is. It doesn't have to be high rises full of condominiums. Secondly, we can focus on co-ops. The city has stopped building co-ops about 20, 30 years ago. We need to reintroduce that idea. Co-ops are very helpful in terms of affordable housing and giving people a place to live. And the fourth thing we can do is modify our zoning. Right now, zoning is 90% for single family homes in Toronto. That has to change. We should make it possible for families to build 3-story homes where 3 or 4 families can live in a house instead of just one family. We can use our land way better that way, make it more accessible to individuals, and increase the amount of affordable housing for people. There's a lot the federal government can do, and it's time that we step in and help people and not just the developers and the people with money. Thank you.
So I want to just say, first of all, that the federal government got out of funding affordable housing, and it was a Liberal budget in the 1990s that set the stage for this crisis of affordability. But what the NDP would do instead is build new affordable housing. There's a couple of things here. We can build 500,000 new green and affordable units with fast start funds that immediately go to co-ops for social housing and for nonprofit housing. And I think that I agree, Adrian, that Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust has given us a great model for how we can actually also transfer land into social ownership, which is important. The NDP would also waive HST and GST on construction of affordable units. We'd also mandate all new builds be carbon neutral by 2025, and we'd help to meet our climate targets that way, and also retrofit existing homes so that make it easier so that people can live more comfortably. It's really important that we take big money out of the housing market. You know, we would increase the capital gains tax from 50% to 75% on house flipping. There's a Liberal candidate in Vancouver that sold 42 properties in 16 years. That's not the kind of thing that we need to be supporting. We need to take money laundering out of the housing market, which is very well documented in Ontario and BC in particular. And we would limit the attractiveness of our housing market to big US firms, like for the one that wants to buy $1 billion worth of homes in Canada. And right now, 20% of our housing market is owned by these kinds of real estate trusts and investors. Our housing is being treated like a stock market, which is creating this crisis of affordability. And I just wanted to quibble with our MP, Julie. The National Housing Strategy, David Holchansky, an expert on housing and on inequality in this country, has said that the investments that the Liberals have made so far have disproportionately, like at 60% of every dollar, benefit for-profit housing providers, and that's not the way to go.
Thank you. Just a reminder to the audience that if you do have questions you want to ask the candidates, you can send them into questions in the chat now. We'll see if we can get to them at the end. We will have some audience questions at the end. We'll be reading them off. Lots of great questions coming in so far. Very excited to ask them. So thank you for that. And now we have our last question. And just a reminder to the candidates, you still have your wild cards if you want to use them. I think my timekeeper will remind me who has used how many of them, but just keep that in mind. All right. Our last question, we're going to do Alejandra, then Julie, and then Adrian. And it is going to be asked by Cooper, who is a Davenport youth climate activist. Go ahead, Cooper.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. So young people are on the forefront of the fight for climate action, as I'm sure we all know, but at the same time, we're also at the forefront of climate impacts. Leaders of the past have failed young people in not adequately tackling the climate crisis that will affect our futures. So how does your climate plan differ from past inadequacy, and how will you incorporate young people into your plan? Thank you.
Well, I think, first of all, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies to big polluters is absolutely essential. Cutting emissions by at least 50% by 2030. You know, the massive expansion in public transit and cycling that we're proposing. But I think we're going further by saying that economy and environment are one and the same, and that climate action and good jobs are the same agenda. This is especially true for young people who have disproportionately suffered under this pandemic economically. So we're proposing that we create a Climate Corps program for young people to get employed and meet the climate adaptation and climate change emergency. To me, it's absolutely essential that the people most affected by any policy are at the heart of the decision-making process. That's what I do in my work and in my volunteer time. And, you know, every day I see in my campaign office so many young people. Yesterday, we had more people under the age of 18 and eligible to vote volunteering than there were people who could vote. So I'm asking everyone here who has a vote to vote for these young people who can't exercise their franchise. They're fighting like their future is at stake, and that's what's really driving me and what's driving the NDP right now. And further, I'd say, Cooper, that I think that the NDP's commitment to lowering the voting age to 16 is absolutely essential, because if young people were to vote and could vote at the age of 16, we would see the massive transformations around the climate emergency that we haven't seen to date. This is about setting really bold ambitions, being unapologetic, and also making sure that we're going after the pandemic profiteers, the big corporations, the 1% who have made so much money during this time, and saying, contribute to the rebuild. Only the NDP is saying that we should tax these people fairly with a 1% wealth tax on wealth over 10 million, with a small increase for individual and for a modest increase in corporate taxes.
Great. Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks so much. So thank you for that excellent question. I will say to you that one of the first things when we were first elected in late 2015 is our Prime Minister created a youth council. We all created a youth council. I've had Davenport youth councils, and I can assure you that I have very active youth councils who are absolutely engaged in all of the policy discussions that we have and the legislations that are being proposed. And that happens with the Prime Minister, and that also happens in Davenport. I'll also just say the following, just because I mentioned that we had already spent over $100 billion to tackle climate change. No government has done as much as this government in Canadian history. Our clean recovery plan is one of the best of G7 countries, and it's actually the best in G7. We have the most detailed climate change plan in the world. And we have also made sure that our targets are bound in law. So we passed the Net Zero Accountability Act that will ensure that these legislative targets will actually be met. And then I'll just give you some quotes just from really great, many of them actually either Green or NDP leaders. As a climate scientist and as someone with a background in climate policy, I've been impressed by Jonathan's leadership on this environment. The climate plan he recently developed and introduced is bold and thoughtful. It is the only credible plan put forward by any party at the federal level. That's by Andrew Weaver, former leader of the Green Party of BC. Mr. Trudeau has had a climate plan last week that was absolutely marvelous. That's when we moved it up to 40 to 45%, and that's by Thomas Mulcair, former NDP leader. The newly strengthened climate plan, combined with the recent nature-based solution commitments to invest $3 billion for increasing carbon stores in trees and other natural sources, has Canada showing real leadership in confronting the climate crisis, says Megan Leslie, President and CEO of World Wildlife Federation, Canada, and Deputy Leader of the NDP and MP for Halifax. Thank you.
Adrian, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're the Green Party. The climate is our specialty. Climate change in the environment is pretty much why we were invented. Real action on climate change, we've always supported young people. My campaign manager is 20 years old, he's a young person. My official agent is 25 years old, he's a young person. I support young people and give them the opportunity to lead and to use their expertise. When it comes to young people, the Green Party will respect their opinions, listen to them, and allow them leadership opportunities. How is our climate plan different from different past inadequacy? First of all, building retrofits. We will employ people in trades all across the country, electricians, plumbers, woodworkers, you name it. This will employ young people as well as existing trade union members. Similarly, investing in clean technology. This will require engineers, scientists, accountants, lawyers, you name it. This will provide employment all across the country in many cities, and working with young people, they will have the opportunity to find employment immediately and not be relegated to the dustbin and for secondhand jobs. Yeah, there's a lot more we can do when it comes to young people, but we should tackle real climate change issues. No more pipelines. If we're giving subsidies to oil companies, make sure that they're retraining oil workers so they can clean up abandoned oil wells, that we can retrain oil workers to work in the clean tech. We should, like I said, retrofilling buildings all across the country. There's a lot we can do that will enable a sustainable economic green recovery, and young people are part of that recovery 100%. And if I may, I'd like to use a wild card.
You absolutely can. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yes, Ms. Zerowitz has stated some rather incredible statements about her government, and I wish to challenge them. The Liberal climate plan is lacking. Their track record is dismal, and it's abysmal. They have the worst record of all G7 countries. Canada has the worst record of all G countries. Our emissions have increased year after year throughout their entire government. Right now, their climate action plan does not even live up to the European standards. It doesn't live up to the American standards. And they've only had, what, 8 months of a new government after the abysmal 4 years of we don't want to mention his name right now. So I think that their plan is full of hot air, and it's full of distractions from the truth, and I'd like to challenge them on that. Thank you.
And I see we have a wild card follow-up from Alejandra. Go. Nope. Oh, so thumbs up. It's thumbs up. Okay, great. And Julie, I think you may have had a wild card earlier that I missed, so I apologize for that. I think you still have one left, and so does Alejandra.
Can I just ask a technical question? How many more questions do we have?
Yeah, we have approximately 4 more questions left.
Okay. I mean, I will address the challenge. I just am waiting for the 4 questions and then I'll.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that. Okay, great. So everybody take a little stretch, twist and turn, because we've got a little bit more time. And I know we're all sitting in our seats, but here's the most exciting part of the debate, which is your questions. So we have been receiving those, just so you know, for transparency, what we're doing. We've been receiving those questions, and Anusha has done the hard work of pulling out the ones that are coming up frequently and smushing together or reframing them so that they can work for all candidates. So I will be asking those questions now. We will get to as many as we can in the time that we have. And I just want to say thank you. Very intelligent and deeply thought out questions. All right, so candidates for the first questions, we're going to go Adrian and then Alejandra, and then we will go with Julie. And the first question is, how do you see the role of pipeline projects in an environmentally and economically sustainable future? Go ahead, Adrian.
How long do I have?
You have 2 minutes. Sorry, these are all 2-minute responses.
Okay. So how do I see the world of pipeline structures?
How do you see the role of pipeline projects in an environmentally and economically sustainable future?
There is no role for pipeline structures and pipeline in the sustainable green economy and recovering from the pandemic. The IPCC said we have to stop resource extraction. The other international climate issues have said that we have to stop building pipelines. The Parliamentary Budget Office said that the Trans Mountain Pipeline will most likely not be profitable, and it's already over budget. Pipelines are relegated to the history. They're like the dinosaurs. This is the 21st century, and this is 2021. Let's move to renewables and to clean tech. No more pipelines. End of story. I have nothing else to say about that.
Thank you, Adrian. And Alejandra, you're next.
I agree with Adrian. There's absolutely no place for pipeline projects in the crisis that we're living right now. We're trying to avert catastrophe right now. Every dollar of investment in the pipeline, the purchase of the pipeline that the Liberals made, is diverting resources and energy and attention from the transition to clean technologies and also a different kind of economy. I also think that the question of how we deal with the displaced workers is really important. The NDP believes in a just transition. You can't just take a worker that was working in the fossil fuel industry and then plop them into minimum wage job putting up solar panels, because that's not equitable either. So that is going to take a lot of investment, and we want those to be good jobs, because that's the work that we need to do. We need working class. We need construction workers. We need a pathway for people to have good careers in this new economy that's sustainable and fair. There is so much infrastructure work to do in this country, from clean drinking water for Indigenous peoples to getting our communities no longer be powered by fossil fuels. This is all possible and doable, and other countries are way ahead of us. I just cannot accept that the Liberals tell us that this is the best that we can do. Continually saying this is the best plan and it has like top scores. That's not the ambitions that we need right now. Absolutely, those are the wrong choices that are being made on our behalf, and we need to act like all life depends on this. And this isn't the path forward. I completely disagree with that decision, and I think that we have to be categorical coming out of this election. A voice elected from Davenport in Parliament who's clear on this issue, and that you can trust.
And Julie, go ahead.
Hi. So I think the question was on pipelines. Look, I too read the IPCC report that Adrian had mentioned and said we have to stop oil extraction. And I totally think that has completely changed, I think, how everybody has viewed sort of the oil and gas sector around the world. So look, the original thinking around TMX was not that we were actually going to pull more oil out of the ground. The original intention was, because we were sending oil down to the United States and they were giving 50 cents on the dollar, how is it that we could, whatever we already had extracted, how do we get the best value for the dollars that we have right now? So that was the original intention around TMX. And any proceeds from that pipeline were supposed to be reinvested back into transitioning, so just transition, as well as a green, clean economy. So that was the original intention. Since the IPCC report came out, I did mention this publicly a number of times. I have written to, and this was I think 2 or 3 months ago, I did ask the Minister of Environment whether we should relook at our TMX strategy and our pipeline strategy. It was not something I had received yet a response back from the minister before our parliament has risen, but I do think that we have to relook at it. Every time we get new bits of information, I do think we have to relook at strategies and decisions we might have made in the past. I will sort of counter something that was made, that in terms of we haven't made any progress. I will say to you that based on government actions since we've been elected, it has already put Canada on the path to reducing our 2030 emissions by 36%, and that is 468 metric tons. That has never been achieved by any government before. So it is not just talk, and $100 billion, by the way, is not just talk. How many seconds do I have left? Unfortunately, I don't have my timer on.
I think you're almost done, and you're done.
Okay, thank you.
Adrian is using his wild card. Adrian, you've got 1 minute.
Yes, I'm sorry, Ms. Zerowitz, but the Liberals have missed the boat on resource extraction and pipeline construction. Listen, I understand oil companies. Canada is a very resource-rich country, and we've used it to our advantage in the past. But we have moved on. This is the 21st century. It's time to focus on clean tech and renewable energies. And I want to say to the oil companies, listen, you've done a really good job for the Canadian economy, for Canadians all across the country, but it's time to refocus and switch to renewables. You have the technical expertise. It's just time for the motivation now. We cannot extract the last barrel of oil just to make a profit and to maximize shareholder profit. That has to change. Join the rest of the world, support Canadians, switch to clean tech, and we'd all be better. And let's leave what oil is in the ground. There are other ways to make profits. There's other way to make money, and there are other ways to employ people across the country. Let's do that. Let's work together and join the 21st century society.
Thank you. All right, so the second audience question, and for the order, we will go Julie, then we will go to Alejandra, and then we'll go to Adrian. Okay. The government has committed Canada to a vast increase in military spending, notably $77 billion for the initial purchase and maintenance over 10 years of a new fleet of F-35 fighter jets, plus many more billions for naval vessels. How can these expenditures be justified given that, one, the military is at the top of fossil fuel users and CO2 polluters in Canada, the huge funds freed up for military expenditures could pay for a Green New Deal. The climate emergency is global. It cannot be addressed through confrontation, but only through diplomacy and cooperation. What is your party's stated policy on these vast increases in military spending? So there's a lot of questions in there. If you need me to repeat anything, I will, but go ahead and answer as best you can in your 2 minutes, starting with Julie.
Okay, well, thank you. First, thanks for the question. Look, we're very committed to ensuring that we meet our net zero targets by 2050, full stop. That means all industries have to be reducing their emissions. And since we've talked, so I firmly believe that, and that includes whether it's military, whether that's oil and gas, whether it's any type of industrial polluter, everybody needs to be meeting their emissions targets. One of the new things that we've actually introduced in our current platform is that we have also indicated that we believe that oil and gas sector also has to reduce their emissions at a pace and scale that's needed to achieve our net zero by 2050, with 5-year targets to stay on track and to achieve this shared goal. So to us, that's super important for us to do. We talk quite a bit about clean technology, and we have to move on it. we have been moving on it. We are a clean energy leader in the world. And that's not just me saying it, Mr. Curry. There's a lot of independent people who are saying that as well. We're absolutely moving on a just transition. It does take time to transition sectors, a whole sector like the oil and gas sector. That's going to take time. There is consultation that started before this election began, and that will continue. I think it is critical that we work with workers, we work with industry, we work with the different provinces and territories to figure out how do we actually expedite it. I think that we do see that climate change is impacting us faster than ever before. And I think we have to move even faster. And I think our government has set in motion already the plan in place for us to be able to move as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Alejandro, you're next.
Yeah, on this one, like on pipelines, I don't agree with Liberal priorities. The militarism doesn't make us, Canada, any safer. In fact, the Canadian government policies of producing and selling what they call Jeeps, but are actually heavy vehicles, armored vehicles to the Saudi regime, which uses it against populations in Yemen and internally, is a terrible decision. It actually creates more instability, generates it creates war. It hurts people. It's not a feminist decision. A feminist prime minister wouldn't do that. And it's displacing people, refugees who are also at the same time being hurt by the climate crisis. Like, we just have to change. Yes, it's hard. It's hard to shift the economy, but those decisions are being made in oil producing countries in other parts of the world who have shifted, who have made commitments to leave the oil on the ground. And also just remember that the oil that we're talking about is devastating. We're talking about the tar sands, which many of us argued would be devastating to Canada. And the only reason that it's profitable for anyone is because of the subsidies that Canada provides to these industries. Change priorities, invest differently, and including, I think, not investing more in the military. And I think I think that's maybe a very personal choice for me, but it's something that I would argue that I think that Canada's contribution to safety on the planet has more to do with becoming a climate leader, with protecting refugees, with doing peacekeeping work, and our role on the world stage has really changed. And I think that it's made us far less safe and the world less safe.
Okay. Yeah, this again, fighter jets, we don't need fighter jets. They're completely not needed. Look at Afghanistan. 20 years, the Americans and its allies were in that war. It's over $2 trillion spent. And what's the outcome? Pretty much the same as it was when we went into it. Let's focus on peace and not war. We don't need fighter jets. Let's invest that money in the green economy and green tech. There's so much more we can do with that money to benefit everyone across the country and not just the military and the military industrial complex. What is our policy? The Green Party will focus on a green economic recovery, a sustainable green economy. We can do that. Fighter jets will increase our climate footprint, not reduce it. We need to reduce our emissions significantly before 2030 and before 2050. Fighter jets will not help that. Let's focus on real climate change solutions. Again, no more new pipelines. Pipelines are a thing of the 20th century and they're past, or they're in the 21st century. Number two, let's focus on a climate change policy where we support oil workers, get them retrained to focus on the new clean tech economy, or train them to clean up the old and abandoned oil wells. Number three, let's focus on retrofitting buildings all across the country. Again, if we solve that, we will help our climate change solution and employ people all across the country, helping our green technology sector. And number four, and number five, no fracking, because fracking is dangerous to our water source and it's not helpful. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks everybody. Okay. Number three, and this one will be NDP, then Green, and then Liberal. Young people have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in terms of job loss and lack of economic prospects. They're also deeply concerned with the climate crisis. What will you do to address youth unemployment and create green jobs?
The NDP's climate plan is specifically focused on creating hundreds of thousands of good jobs, not minimum wage jobs. As I mentioned before, the idea of doing a climate corps could actually deploy many young people in this country to attend to the climate emergency with immediate strategies to do both adaptation and also the kind of work that we need to do to mitigate the harm that's already here. For me, it's also important that we create pathways for good careers in this country. So having conditions that actually mean that young people, particularly from equity-seeking groups, are able to get into these good jobs in construction in particular, which isn't always accessible to everyone through community benefits requirements, a movement that I've helped to build in this country. I think that also the need to have more stability and the ability to be retrained also depends a lot on people's capacity to leave unstable work. The NDP is proposing that workers be able to use employment insurance, either when they're going off to care for a parent or when they want to study. Secondly, I think that the burden of education on young people is massive and unacceptable. The NDP would reinstate grants for students, do loan forgiveness, stop charging interest on student loans. The suite of interventions, I think, can't just be the jobs. Obviously, we've got a plan for that, but it also has to be making changing housing from being a right, from being a market to being more of a right, and taming what's happening with housing. Acting like it's an emergency, acting like what we're facing is actually urgent is what we need right now, and young people are going to lead the way on that.
Great. So Adrian, you're next.
Who's next?
Adrian and then Julie. Yeah.
What we will do for young people in terms of job loss and unemployment. Well, the first thing is a universal basic income. If we make it possible to top up people's income per month, that will help them with rent, with their bills, with groceries, will help them with their prescriptions and their health care. Second is cancellation of student debt. Students are burdened with post-secondary education debt, and it's unfathomable that we're making them deal with this at a time when they're struggling just to find employment and struggling with education. Third, free post-secondary education. There's no reason why a country as rich as Canada cannot offer free secondary education for everybody. We're not just talking university education, we're talking college education. We're talking about trade schools where people can learn how to be electricians, carpenters, plumbers. This goes a long way in terms of youth unemployment. And again, I'll come back to this, solve the climate crisis. If we can solve the climate crisis, we improve the prospects for all our young people. So again, let's focus on building solar panels, building solar farms and wind farms, and again, housing affordability. If we build more co-ops and offer more affordable housing units in buildings, we will help young people find a home, be able to afford it, and then they can focus on their health and their families and getting ahead in life.
And Julie, you're next.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. So very important question. I think that our government has spent a disproportionate amount of time making sure that youth are not going to be disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. We've made the largest ever investment in young Canadians to respond to the pandemic, totaling $13.1 billion over 6 years, including action on student grants, loans, and training. We have created 300,000 new work opportunities and experiences for young Canadians and provided income support to over 700,000 students through the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. We've made a historic investment in Canada Summer Jobs. And in Davenport, when I arrived in late 2015, there was about $295,000 given for Canada Summer Jobs. I fought to make sure that we have increased that number. This past year, we have increased it to $1.9 million. And that is directly to students here in Davenport. We've also done quite a bit to make sure that we are making, post-secondary education more accessible. We've doubled student grants. We've canceled student loan interest, and we're taking no student loan repayments until students are earning $40,000, although in our platform, we have increased that to $50,000. So students and youth are very much top of mind for us. And just overall, it's an important statistic to note is 92% of the jobs that were lost during the pandemic has been recouped here in Canada versus 76% in the United States. We are well on our way to creating over 1 million jobs. So we will continue these efforts. The economy is changing all the time, and we want to continue to support our youth through the changing transition of our economy and our marketplace. Thanks.
Thanks. And we have a wild card response from Alejandra. Go ahead.
So we're recouping jobs, but they're not good jobs. People are working in the gig economy. People are working without, not knowing what hours they're going to get the following week. This government had the opportunity at the start of this pandemic to bring in 10 paid sick days for federal workers, which would have given so much life to a movement which actually started here in Davenport, which is decent work and also 15 in fairness. We need so much more than what is being done right now for young people. Young people are working without benefits. They need pharmacare. They need dental care. Their mental health has suffered. We don't have mental health services for young people. We need affordable housing. So this government had the opportunity to do these things, and we didn't need this election to actually do any of the things that are about lifting the floor for people. I think that what we need to do is actually deliver results, and that means taking on those big corporate interests and raising the money that we need to actually change the economy.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, we have our final question of the night. Sorry, audience, we don't have time for any more after this. This will be our last question before we go on to the final statements. We will go Adrian and then Julie and then Alejandra. And here's the final question. Canadians generate the most waste per capita of all countries. We're number one. Good for us. Emphasis was mine on that one, by the way. The plastics industry produces an ever-increasing amount of plastics from virgin fossil fuels and other additives, many of which are toxic and simply designed to be thrown away. What will you do to ensure unnecessary single-use plastic products are eliminated quickly and plastic manufacturers pay the costs of the pollution that they cause? All right, over to you, Adrian.
Okay. Yes, this is an issue that's been frustrating for me for quite a while now. As an environmentalist and as a person who was born in Jamaica and came here, I'm amazed at how much we waste. For example, 50% of the food that's produced in Canada is wasted. I'm going to repeat that. 50% of the food that we produce in Canada is wasted. That is a horrible thing. How is that possible in this country? That's one thing we have to look after, first of all, when we talk about food security. Second of all, plastic waste. We've been trying to ban plastic for the longest time, and only now is it becoming trendy. Well, that's unacceptable. And another thing that's unacceptable is black plastic. Why are we producing plastic that cannot be recycled? Why are we producing plastic that cannot be recycled? That is unconscionable. So that's something we have to change, and we have to challenge industries to face that. And the second thing is rice recycling. We do not recycle enough in this country and in the city, and definitely not here in Davenport. For example, we should be reusing products instead of tossing them in the recycling bin to be crushed up and then reused as recycled material. That's wasted energy. We can do way better. We can go back to the 80s when milk bottles were recycled. For example, our spaghetti, our ragu spaghetti jars, they can be recycled and reused, and we can save energy and when production costs. There is so much more we can do, and I challenge our society to do better because we can. We have the technology, we have the know-how. It's just a matter of will, and we have to challenge our corporations to be more responsible, to look after the life of their products from beginning to end, and not just have this throwaway mentality that we've come accustomed to in North America and in Canada, and unfortunately here in Davenport. Thank you.
All right, Julie, you're next.
Thanks so much. Thanks for that excellent question. This is definitely an area that we have to move faster and do far more on. I had mentioned earlier that we're already starting to ban single-use plastics. And we have a goal of eliminating plastic waste by 2030. Our first single-use, 6 single-use plastics will be eliminated by the end of this year, beginning of next year. So that's already in motion. And our game plan is to accelerate the implementation of our zero plastic waste action plan. I will say to you that I agree with Adrian. I do think that we need to do far more with the waste that we have. There is in our platform our desire to implement a right to repair program, which will extend the life of home appliances. I think that we will also introduce a 15% tax credit to cover the cost of home appliance repairs performed by technicians. So essentially what we're trying to do is a series of measures that are going to make sure that we don't just, it's not cheaper for us to be buying more things, but to actually be fixing things that we have, and that suppliers are actually producing goods like the old Maytag sort of washing machines that last forever and ever and ever. I'll also say in terms of food waste, we created Canada's first ever food waste reduction challenge, investing 20 million into innovative ways across the country to cut food waste. One amazing organization in our riding, Compost Canada, actually has created a series of programs. And there's someone that if I'm blessed to be re-elected, I really want to work with, so that we could start implementing a number of programs here in Davenport. So there's a number of other measures that we have on this. It is an important issue. It is an area that we need to do far more on, and we need to move far faster on. Thank you.
Waste, massive in Canada. We really need to face this problem around food waste. That's a corporate choice. Corporate food entities would rather waste food than actually reduce and reuse, and that's wrong. And the NDP has a strategy for that. Around the right to repair, it's particularly true with small appliances and electronics. That's in the NDP platform. The NDP would ban the use of single-use plastics. There really is no way to safely recycle plastic. And the fact that many of those glass jars have been replaced with plastic packaging has more to do with fossil fuel subsidies than anything else. So we've got to pivot away from that. And also the federal government has a huge role to play here. It's like the Consumer Packaging and Labeling Act and the associated regulations haven't been changed since 1999. Like, we shouldn't be allowing for packaging to be so much packaging in the first place. Styrofoam, we're talking about a small toy and a plastic toy and a massive amount of plastic. That's just to make more money for fossil fuel companies that have now massively invested in plastics production, because as consumption of fuel is set to go down, they've pivoted, and we've helped them with our tax dollars to do that. So the next thing I'd say is, like, Canada is irresponsibly producing a lot of plastic waste, and then we export it so that people in other countries have to deal with the massive environmental impact of that. We know that plastic degrades. We know that it enters the bloodstream. We know that it enters the environment. We're also going to ban the exportation of plastic waste, which I think would force us to face the kind of consumption lifestyle that we've been accustomed to, and that's been pushed on us by corporate interests. Equity and sustainability is a much better way to principle to organize our economy.
All right, thank you. We've got one wild card from Julie. Julie, go ahead. You got a minute.
Thank you. I think I want to choose my last one. Look, I think we talked a lot about climate plans. I want to give some independent assessments. So there's a person by the name of Mark Jacquard. He's from Simon Fraser University. He looked at all of the environmental platforms of all the parties, and he indicated the following: The Liberals score high relative to other parties for their performance and he gave us an 8 out of 10 from 2015 to 2016 as the first federal government to be honest about the necessary policies and their costs. During this election campaign, they've unveiled these policies and they are likely to achieve their target, which is good. The Greens and NDP score low on all accounts. It's misleading to tell Canadians we can magically eliminate 50% and more of our GHG emissions in just 9 years without enormous cost and disruption, especially for certain workers and regions. The NDP score even lower than the Greens on climate sincerity because it is not credible that they would destroy Canadian industries as the means to achieve their target. So I want to be able to say this is an independent assessment. He's not related to anybody in the Liberal Party. And I would encourage people to look at these independent assessments on each of the climate platforms. Thank you very much.
And Adrian, you have a 1 minute wild card as well. Go for it. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Listen, independent assessments are nice, but the reality of the fact is that we are in a horrible position when it comes to waste, and we have to do better. I think that we should hold our companies responsible. The Green Party will come up with ways to reduce waste, and we can. We can increase tax credits for companies to move to clean tech. This is something that we can, because the economy, the future economy of Canada depends on it. Let's come up with a vision where we value our environment and think of it first over profit. Let's not maximize shareholder profit. Let's maximize our environment and our profit of that. Again, this is the 21st century. Let's leave this is the information age. Let's join the information age and leave the industrial age behind. We can do this. It's a matter of having a vision as a society and as a country to move forward. And it's time for us to do that. And I, as a member of the Green Party, invite you to join us with this.
Thank you. All right, we're going to finish with closing statements, 1.5 minutes each. So just due to time, I want to make sure we end on time today. So 1.5 minutes each. And we will start with Alejandra, then we'll go to Adrian, and then we'll go to Julie.
It's true that the climate economists that Julie cited said that the Liberal plan was better, but I think that it's clear that for New Democrats, the state has an important role to play. Governments have an important role to play. And in fact, every innovation ever has had massive government investment. We take a different approach. We think that there has to be leadership on affordable housing, on transit, ambitious climate targets, no more fossil fuel subsidies, and that with our public dollars properly used to support people, we can make this transition and we can avert this climate catastrophe. What's the big difference? Well, the Liberals say that they have the best plan, but the results aren't there. We're actually emitting more. We're doing worse than any other G7 country. There are a lot of promises. And when I go to the door, people are tired of hearing promises. They want action. A big question for us is, how do we recover? When we come out of this pandemic, are we going to have more inequality, or are we going to finally go to the wealthiest people and the corporations that have made billions of record dollars and ask them to help with the rebuild? The US has a higher corporate tax rate now than we do. We are falling behind, and we need to do a fair recovery. We need to generate that revenue. And that's housing, that's climate, that's Indigenous rights. That's pharmacare. A minority parliaments is when we have everything good in this country. Healthcare, a minority parliament, strong NDP. Pensions, a minority parliament, a strong NDP. And if you want real solutions to the climate crisis, a minority parliament with a strong NDP is the way to get it.
Thanks, Alejandra. Adrian.
Well, thank you for this. We're the Green Party. We think of society of what it can be instead of supporting the status quo. This is the 21st century. Let's live and build a 21st century where all people are prosperous. We can have electric cars instead of combustible engines. We can have cleaner air. We have reconciliation with Indigenous people, where our seniors are looked after in national health care. We have national daycare to support women and the most vulnerable. There's so much we can do. And ways to get, and there are easy ways to get it. 4 simple things. No more pipeline constructions. Let's focus on solar farms and wind farms. No more subsidies to oil companies unless they're going to transition to clean tech, or they're going to train workers to transition to the green economy, or to clean up abandoned oil wells. Let's focus on a national electricity corridor where we can transmit electricity inter-province. Right now, Quebec has 5 cents per kilowatt hour electricity that they're hoping that they're dying to sell to Ontario, but we won't do it. And let's retrofit buildings across the country, because this will employ people in all the trades, electricians, welders, you name it. It will employ union people, it will employ young people. And second of all, well, third, fourth, fifth, let's focus on what we can do and not where we are right now, because it's time for us to do better, because we know we can better. We've seen that through the pandemic, and it's time for us to listen to our scientists and to listen to our elders. And most of all, let's work with our Indigenous people and solve our climate crisis, because they have the solutions for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. And Julie, take us home.
Thank you. So look, as I mentioned, I'm a climate activist. I very deliberately am part of the Liberal team because they are serious about implementing an urgent climate action plan. I don't want to just be a voice at the national level. I want to be part of a party that is going to govern and that's going to actually implement the plan as quickly as possible. And let's be realistic. It's now down to who's going to govern. It's going to be Conservatives or it's going to be the Liberals. The Liberals, we've already spent $100 billion. We have a great record in terms of our detailed plan, and we've made an enormous amount of progress. If the Conservatives are elected, they will go back to the Harper era targets of 30% below 2005. We're going to be the first country in the world in that case to actually roll back our international commitments. We have a detailed plan. If you haven't had a chance, please make sure, go to A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy, look at it. Please also look at our very detailed plan within our platform. It is also excellent information. We have put a price on pollution. I haven't mentioned that enough times today, but we are global leaders in actually putting a price on pollution. We have a detailed plan on how we're going to be achieving our Paris Accord targets by 2030, and we are determined to meet our net zero targets by 2050. So I would not be running if I did not think that we would be part of a Liberal government that is serious about climate change and that we urgently need to tackle it as quickly as possible. Thank you so much.
Everybody, thank you so much for being here tonight. I want to give a big thank you to our three candidates who have many doors to knock on in this very short period of time, and they've taken time out of doing that door knocking to come talk with us today about what I would biasly consider possibly the most pressing issue that we're facing as humanity. So thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Alejandra. Please go check out their platforms. Please ask them more questions. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions. I wish we could take you all out for a beer and ask all the questions in the world. We can't do it today. You can definitely ask these candidates. So please be in touch with them. Check out their platforms. I want to thank Van City again, and I want to thank Ryerson Leadership Lab again for supporting this event. I want to give a big shout out to Cooper, Julie, Nahum, Lisa, Ben, and Anusha, who were on the organizing team for this event, and all of you for coming out. And of course, to just say thank you to GreenPAC. Please check out GreenPAC as well. I'm very biased because I'm the former executive director, but GreenPAC is trying to get environmental champions in all political parties elected. This is essential if we're going to make any kind of change and progress on climate change. We need to have political leaders who care about this issue. I'm going to get off my soapbox and let you all go to bed, but thank you so much again, candidates, for being here. Let's give them all a hand, and happy voting, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.